Hello, and welcome to another episode from EasyHealthyBread.com. I'm Heather, your host. In this week's video, I decided to share with you the best practices on how to store different ingredients in whole grain breads. If you're just switching over from white flour, this is really important information because it is not the same methods for storage. So I thought I would go over the different ways I store my whole grains, the sweeteners I use in my breads, and the healthy fats I include as well. So stay tuned. So the first thing I want to talk about is flours and other grains. This is the most different from stuff that you're used to, and it has the most different storage methods. So I have here what I store my all-purpose flour in. This rarely gets used for me anymore because I've pretty much completely switched over to whole wheat and other whole grains, but this is what you probably have your flour in right now or something like it. It's got a nice seal, and it's a big jar. It's nice because you can scoop out of it pretty easily, but this is not something that you should use for storing whole wheat flour or any other whole grain. Instead, you're going to want to use something like this. So these are some different flours I have set out here. This is what I heat my whole wheat flour in, and it's just a regular Tupperware. The reason that I like this one specifically is that it is shallow and wide. So it's really easy for me to scoop flour, and I can scoop and level it off without it getting a mess anywhere. And also, this gets stored in the freezer. So that's the main difference between whole grains and refined flours, is that you need to store them in the freezer or the refrigerator. The natural oils in the grains that are refined out in white flour are still present because it's the whole kernel, everything there, including those oils, and so they will go rancid if you do not store them in the freezer. If you store them out on the counter and don't use it up really fast, it's going to go bad, and you're probably not going to notice, and then you're going to cook something that's going to taste funny. So I use this because it fits in my freezer really easily since it's small this way, so I can just stack stuff on top of it. And most people's freezers are pretty full. I probably don't clean mine out as often as I should, so this works for me perfectly. So for my main ingredient of whole wheat flour, this is what I use. Then for other things that I have a little less of, like this coconut flour that I got at my local grain store, or this flaxseed meal that's from Bob's Red Mill that I love, this stuff I just leave in the packaging it comes in, and if possible, just seal it up really well. So again, these are items that will go bad. So I have pumpernickel flour in here, I have my Vital Wheat gluten, all that stuff I keep in my freezer, just depending on the size, kind of depends on how I store it in there. So a lot of stuff I have stored in their bags, and what I do is I take packing tape, like this one, it didn't have a lot of room like this guy, so I rolled it over really good a bunch of times, you know, fold and fold and fold down, and then taped it down. And I'll retape it every time I use it. So I don't use flaxseed meal a ton, so it's fine. This guy I have the twist tie on, which works great, and then some stuff which I use a lot, so I want to be able to get in and out, I just dump right into a Ziploc bag. For this, I keep the bag in there so I remember that it's Vital Wheat gluten. Obviously, you could just write it on there too. I have the same with my pumpernickel flour, and there's actually a label in the bag here as well. Let's see if I can get it out, to remind me that it's pumpernickel. So that's kind of how I store that stuff. This is my yeast. So I buy my yeast in bulk at Costco. Instead of those packets or small jars, buying it in bulk is 1,000 times cheaper. So I just dump it into here. Usually I write the expiration date on here, but I forgot with this one, because if you don't know the expiration date, you could use old yeast and then your bread won't perform. It won't rise. So if you're ever not sure, you can proof your yeast pretty easily, and I can talk about that later, but you do want to write an expiration date on here if you buy a lot of yeast, because sometimes you might not use it fast enough. This I keep in this Ziploc bag, and I keep on the door in my fridge. Just easy way to store it, keeps it good. And then stuff like oats, I actually just keep right in my pantry, right in the container they came in. Usually the container stuff that food comes in is pretty food safe, just because of laws that has to be that way. So a lot of times keeping stuff in the container it comes in is the way to go. So there you have it. There's the flours and how I use and store them. So moving on to healthy fats that I put in my breads. There's not a ton of healthy fats that I use, and so there's not much to talk about for storage, but I do use olive oil for breads that are definitely the savory side, stuff like pizza or dinner rolls. I mean, honestly, the oil that you use does not flavor the bread all that much. In certain cases it might, like with a focaccia where you brush it over the top, or maybe want to use an herbed type of oil. But I use olive oil for all those type of needs. You want to get an olive oil that's a dark bottle because it is sensitive to light. You want to keep it in a cabinet in a place that does not vary in temperature, so nothing really near the stove, near like a window. You don't want to keep it near a window really. I mean, it's in a cabinet, so I guess you just don't want it to have temperature fluctuations, and you want to keep it a little bit cooler. I do not keep an oil like this in the fridge because it will kind of harden up. If you've ever stored like homemade vinaigrette in the fridge, the oil kind of clumps up a little bit because it will get kind of hard. So that's what I do with my olive oil. And then you guys know about the coconut oil. I use coconut oil and love it in tons of my recipes. I have this organic cold pressed coconut oil that I got at Costco. It lasts for a good long time. This one doesn't expire until 7/13 of 2014. So I've used it about to here, and I've probably had it for maybe 6 months. And what I do is kind of the same rule as this. I keep it in a cabinet. Coconut oil is solid at room temperature, so you just don't want to get warm and kind of melt and get solid and melt and get solid. It'll be kind of weird then. So how I store this, I actually store mine with a spoon inside. Coconut oil is harder to use maybe than an olive oil because it's not pourable, so it's harder to measure. So usually when I use it, I scoop it out into my tiny little saucepan and I melt it, and then I pour and measure what I need. So that's why I just keep a spoon in here. I wash it every once in a while, but mostly I just keep it in there. And then the third and final fat that I tend to use in recipes once in a while is Pam. I'm not really proud of this one. In fact, I should just get one of those oil misters. I just haven't yet. But I will after this can of Pam. But I always get the olive oil, not the canola. Most people have plenty of corn in their diets, and olive oil has more health benefits than canola. Canola is not bad for you, but I just try and stick with olive oil as a general rule now. It is a little bit more expensive, but just for Pam and spraying stuff that needs cooking oil, I use Pam, and it's just easier. You know, if I'm being really healthy and conscientious that day, I'll melt some coconut oil and spread it over what I need to spread it over instead of using Pam, but Pam is kind of a convenience thing. So I just keep it in the cabinet as well. It's the same rules as an olive oil or the coconut oil. So finally we have our sweeteners. There's just not that many out there. So what I use to sweeten most of my breads and baked goods is honey, and then sometimes I use a white sugar or a brown sugar. So I keep white sugar in this on my counter. It will clump up a little bit. One thing I don't like about this is it's kind of hard to measure out of. If you're making a big batch of something, you might need an entire cup of sugar, and it's just kind of hard to get the cup in here. So that's why I prefer things like what I keep my flour in that's a little wider mouthed. So that's that, but you can just keep that right on your counter. For honey, honey is a little more fickle. And like I bought this giant thing of honey at Costco, and I kind of wish that I hadn't. So I bake a ton of bread, but I couldn't even go through this fast enough to have it not start getting crystallized. I wrote that post recently on how to save it, and this is the jug I was talking about. It's a big jug of honey, and it worked, but I still have to go through all of this honey to make it worth it for how much I saved. And frankly, I don't think it's worth it. It's kind of hard to pour out of something this big, but how you store your honey is important. You want to store it in a place that is a little bit warmer but has a consistent temperature. It is temperature fluctuations that encourage it to crystallize, and especially cold temperatures. So what I do now is I keep mine in a high cabinet in my ceiling because heat rises, so it's more likely for it to stay warmer there longer, and I keep it in a part of my kitchen that I feel stays warm longer. So I have it in a high cabinet that's near my oven, so it doesn't fluctuate because it doesn't really get that much heat from the oven, but I do feel like it stays warmer there. It's away from, you know, doors being open and drafts and stuff like that. So that's where I keep my honey. Thank you so much for watching my ingredient video. I hope you've learned a little, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel so you never miss a video. I have tons coming out, a new one every week.